call back for 86 and 2 Central. Negative K, nothing further, just kitty cabbie in the corner.
I served as a state trooper for 25 years, and over the years, I thought I'd seen it all, until this one night changed my mind. It happened several years ago on a night shift, around 4 a.m., while patrolling an interstate. If you've ever heard of the show Cops, you know it followed real police officers on the job, capturing some of their most intense moments. It was wildly popular, though sadly, new episodes aren't made anymore. Back in those days, I was lucky enough to be featured a few times. This night was one of those times. My cameraman was named Joe, a pretty straightforward, no-nonsense guy. On this particular night, I had parked my car on the side of the interstate. It wasn't exactly the safest area. Run-down, abandoned buildings dotted the roadside, often becoming havens for drug activity. As part of my routine, I'd make rounds through their parking lots. One place, an old gas station, was notorious for trouble, so I decided to check it out. Joe readied his camera, and as we pulled up, a flashlight's beam flickered inside the building. I parked the cruiser and watched. There were no other cars in sight, which seemed odd. Drug deals usually involved at least 2 people, and I could only see one light. Still, I had to investigate. I grabbed the speaker and announced, "Police! Whoever's inside, come out now." Instantly, the flashlight snapped off. Silence. With no other option, I stepped out, approaching the open door with Joe close behind, camera rolling. As we got closer, a rotten stench hit me, sharp and sickly, like something dead had been left to decay. I swept my flashlight inside and called out again, "Police!" The building was small, any noise could be heard anywhere inside. For a second, I stood still, listening, and then I heard something. It was faint, but distinct, a dragging sound coming from the back of the building. "Who's there?" No answer. I entered, creeping toward the back room where I'd seen movement. A dark figure was visible, but just as my flashlight landed on them, they bolted toward a rear exit. I gave chase, but by the time I reached the back door, they were gone. The area was surrounded by a cornfield, and I knew finding them was impossible in the dark. Still, I made a short search, but quickly realized it was futile. Joe and I returned to the building, but what we found inside left us speechless. In the back room lay a lifeless body. I called for backup immediately and explained what had happened, but we never caught the person responsible. And due to the condition of the body, it couldn't even be identified. As for the footage Joe had taken, none of it ever made it to air. I'm 22 and just started working as a highway patrol officer. I usually patrol the quieter highways, and I won't lie, it's been an intense start. Being fresh on the job, with barely 3 months of experience, I'd still get tense, especially since U.S. patrol officers often work alone. By now, though, I was starting to find my rhythm. Most of my shifts were nights, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At first, I hated the hours, but then I realized they kept me busy. Late nights are when reckless drivers come out, far more than during the day. One Thursday night around 2 a.m., I was cruising along, the highway dead quiet. The road was lined with thick forest on both sides, so I kept my speed steady at around 65 in case a deer or something jumped out. After driving for a good 10 minutes without seeing a single car, I noticed something up ahead. A dark-colored sedan with its hazard lights flashing, sitting half on the shoulder and half in the road, blocking part of the lane. As I got closer, I saw the driver's side door was wide open, swung out into the lane. My instincts kicked in. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I found an abandoned vehicle with hazards on, moving in to investigate." Then, I stepped out of my cruiser and approached the car, flashlight in hand. The car's interior light was on, but nobody was inside. Right away, I could tell something was off. The keys were in the ignition, the engine was still running, yet there was no sign of the driver. I flashed my light around, scanning the trees. Hello? Is anyone here? I waited, straining to hear any response. Just as I was about to radio in for backup, a shape caught my eye by the tree line. There, half hidden among the shadows, was a man staring straight at me. He wore a mask, not just any mask, but something grotesque, like the ones you'd see in those Purge movies. My pulse quickened as I raised my flashlight for a better look. That's when I saw them. 4 other figures, all in similar masks, watching me silently from the trees. Each one clutched a weapon. A couple had baseball bats, but others held guns. One guy even had a pump-action shotgun. I froze, then slowly reached for my gun, trying to steady my hands as I aimed at them. "Drop your weapons! Now!" I called out. But they didn't move, just kept staring as if they were sizing me up. I felt cold sweat trickling down my back as I began inching backward, never breaking eye contact. Then, from behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of rustling in the trees. I'd had enough. Forget protocol. I sprinted back to my cruiser and threw myself inside, my heart pounding. As I floored the gas, I caught a glimpse in my mirrors. More of them, at least 7, spread out on each side of the road, all wearing those eerie masks, blending into the darkness of the tree line. I raced down the highway, radioing for backup. I knew I was far out, and it would take a few minutes for anyone to reach me. Those minutes felt endless. When backup finally arrived, I led them back to the spot, explaining what had happened. But by the time we returned, there was nothing. The car was gone. Not a trace of anyone, just the faint marks from tire tracks along the shoulder. The incident caused a stir, and for weeks after, we had extra patrols in the area, always staying close. As far as I know, nothing ever happened again. To this day, I still feel haunted by that night. I can't shake the feeling that if I'd just handled things differently, we might have caught them. But instead, I ran, and now they're still out there somewhere. I don't know who they were. A gang, a cult, or something else entirely. But one thing's for sure. Those masked figures are still out there, and I'll always carry that night with me. When I was 17, my mom's job kept her traveling a lot, so my dad often took me out for dinner, just the two of us. One night, we decided to go to Pizza Hut. It was around 7 p.m., and my dad had just finished his shift. Back then, he worked as a police officer, usually keeping regular hours, so nights like these were routine. We got our usual order, chatted, and headed home afterward. It was a quiet drive, and we were deep in conversation, though I can't recall about what now. Eventually, I noticed my dad had gone quiet, his gaze locked on the rearview mirror. We were close to home, still on the main roads, but something was off. When I asked him if everything was okay, he muttered, "That car behind us, it's been following us since we left Pizza Hut." I turned around and spotted a blacked-out SUV tailing us, its headlights glaring, almost too close. My dad's expression tightened. "We need to see if they're really following us," he said, and started taking random turns, weaving through unfamiliar streets to test if the SUV would do the same. The knot in my stomach grew as the SUV matched every move, sticking close and shadowing each turn. By now, it was around 9 p.m., and the streets were mostly empty. Then, out of nowhere, the SUV's high beams flicked on, flooding our car with light. I could see my dad's jaw clench as he shut me out, his full attention on losing this pursuer. Minutes ticked by in silence until he suddenly told me to grab his phone from his pocket, find a certain contact, and put the call on speaker. My hands were trembling, and I fumbled with the buttons, trying to keep calm. When someone answered, their voice sounded cheerful, but my dad quickly interrupted, summarizing the situation in short, tense sentences. There was a pause on the other end, followed by muffled voices and faint radio beeps. The man on the other line started instructing us, guiding us down different streets while we tried to shake the SUV. At one point, the voice said, "Turn into the Tesco car park coming up on your left. We have 3 response vehicles moving in from the other side." We turned sharply into the near-deserted car park, and sure enough, the SUV followed us in. Then, as if on cue, flashing red and blue lights burst into view, surrounding us from every angle, filling the lot with the sound of sirens. My dad leapt out of the car and disappeared into the flurry of officers moving toward the SUV. From where I sat, heart pounding, I could see the police vehicles boxing it in. Moments later, after what felt like an eternity of shouting and movement, my dad slipped back into our car, expression steady, and started driving us out of the car park. As we passed by the SUV, I caught a glimpse of 3 men, all appearing to be in their late 20s, handcuffed and leaning over the hood of the car, surrounded by officers. On the way home, my dad finally explained. He told me he'd been working on a drugs task force, intercepting large shipments of narcotics moving across the country, something I'd never known. He explained that sometimes people who lost huge amounts of money when caught didn't take it well. Occasionally, they even targeted specific officers in retaliation. My dad quit the force a few years later, but he admits that night left a lasting mark on him. And for me, knowing how close I'd come to that hidden danger my dad faced regularly, I'll never forget the terror of that chase.